Blog Talk Radio.
I absolutely love that piece of music. It's just so pretty, ladies and gentlemen. That was from Craig Dobbin. He did the soundtrack for Barbara Marx Hubbard's Visions of a Universal Humanity. It was absolutely beautiful. Welcome, welcome, everybody, to Paranormal 101, Steve O'Reilly's Saturday Night Show. I am your host, DCS, and I am so excited to be with you this evening. We've got a great guest lined up. Just some little housekeeping news for everybody. My second book, Synarchy, Book 2, The Ascension, it is done. I am so excited. I cannot wait to share it with everybody. We are doing a book release party right here on P101 July 3rd. So definitely show up for that. I'll answer questions about the book. Co-host Melchizedek will be joining us. Hopefully some other people from some other different radio stations, and we'll just talk about some of the topics surrounding the novel as they relate to the paranormal. Let's see, what else do I have for you? Oh, I'll be on the Jackal's Head. He's got a really great radio show over at Tenacity Radio. I will be with him late Sunday night, it's about midnight Eastern Standard Time on the 27th. So definitely join us for that. Jackal was on one of our roundtables. He's got a really great show over there, so I'm very excited about that. And that's all the housekeeping I have for you. So now we can just go ahead and jump right into the good news. Yeah. So the first good news stories I want to share with you, it's not a long article because it was actually a video, and I wish that I had the time to record some of the audio for the video because it was just absolutely fabulous. And basically, what the story is about is when an anti-gay hate group decided to visit a school, the students of Gun High drowned out their protest with a celebration of acceptance. And the little brief thing that they have about it was, when the students of Gun High School in Palo Alto, California, heard that members of the Westboro Baptist Church, an extremist anti-gay group known for blaming tragedies including September 11th and the Virginia Tech shootings on American tolerance for homosexuality, would be protesting outside their school, they did not sit quietly. The church had announced that it would picket in front of the Bay Area schools and Jewish institutions holding its trademark signs such as God hates you, God hates fags, and the children of Gun High School gathered to meet them. They waved signs and sang songs in celebration of love and acceptance. And the video of this is absolutely phenomenal. You can YouTube it, Gun High School Sings Away Hate Group. So please go and check it out. It really is just a beautiful video of a whole bunch of high school kids who are standing out on the street, across the street from the hate group, and they're holding up these really awesome signs that say love and God loves and love thy neighbor and acceptance here and not at our school. And it was just a really, I think, a really very, very mature, really just awesome response to combating the hate. So I really wanted to share that with you guys. And the video just it just makes you smile. So please go to YouTube and check it out. The second article I have for you tonight is absolutely adorable and another example of kids just schooling the heck out of us. And it is a girl who raises thousands for Gulf birds. Olivia Bowler doesn't have time for anything else these days except to draw and paint. But that's okay for the artistic fifth grader because everything she does is for the birds. The Islip, New York girl, who turns 11 on Friday, has raised an estimated $80,000 by sending her sketches and paintings of birds to people who donate to organizations helping with relief efforts in the Gulf of Mexico disaster. I do some in the mornings and some in the afternoons, and weekends are really the time for me to get cracking on them, Olivia told MSNBC on Thursday in a telephone interview as she and her parents were headed to the Gulf for a visit. Olivia came up with the idea to help birds in the Gulf 4 days after the Deepwater Horizon rig exploded on April 20th, killing 11 workers and triggering the nation's worst oil spill. Olivia's family grew up in Alabama, and she has spent vacations in the Gulf. Olivia heard about the oil spill, and she immediately thought of the birds. She's a bird lover. She knew they were nesting, and she knew the spill would be an incredible change to their habitat, said her mother, Nadine Bowler. So Olivia wrote to the National Audubon Society saying she would like to help by doing drawings and giving the Wildlife Conservation Group any money she raised. She signed it, a bit preciously, Olivia Bowler, 11 years old and willing to help. Thus was born Olivia's Save the Gulf campaign. In addition to purchasing one of Olivia's drawings, the Audubon Society collaborated with Olivia's family to create a fundraising program whereby Olivia sends one of her original paintings to anyone who donates to any of several organizations helping wildlife in the Gulf. AOL even got on board, giving Olivia her own artist gallery on its site and donating $25,000 to the Audubon in her name. Appearances on local and national TV followed, and her Save the Gulf, Olivia's Bird Illustrations page on Facebook has now attracted more than 10,000 fans. Olivia creates her artwork with heavy stock paper, ebony pencil, and watercolors. She has sent out about 150 original illustrations so far and has capped the number at 500, after which contributors will receive limited edition prints, says her mother. The Audubon Society is overseeing the donation process. According to wildlife officials, hundreds of pelicans, gulls, sandwich terns, and other birds in the Gulf have been collected alive with visible oil, but more than 100 oil birds have been found dead. The numbers are expected to rise dramatically as oil blankets the sea, marshlands, and the coastline. I really wanted to help the birds, and I'm really lucky Audubon found out, Olivia says. It takes Olivia between 15 and 30 minutes to do a drawing. Between that and meteor inquiries, there isn't much time for anything else. It's really crazy how many people want my drawings, Olivia says. I really don't mind the publicity. I don't say I love it. I don't crave it, but I don't say I hate it either. At school, she says, some kids are jealous and some kids are like, can I have your autograph? Adds her mother, she knows it's for a good cause. She didn't get into this to be a celebrity. She just wanted to raise money and awareness. Olivia's interest transcends the Gulf. And in the meantime, she says, you don't need artistic talent to pitch in with spill relief efforts. Try your best. You can do anything to help. So says the 11-year-old girl schooling us all. And I thought that was just a really awesome story. And the article actually had some pictures, too, of Olivia's drawings, and they're actually really quite good. So if anybody's interested in checking that out and maybe grabbing one, donating some money to this terrible, terrible oil spill disaster, which I'm not going to get into because I will just get angry. But if you definitely want to help, that is an awesome way. And you know what? Really kudos to Olivia for, just taking some initiative and doing what she can do to help. That's a really awesome thing. So my last article for you this evening is a trip, and I read it, and I had to share it because it's a trip. So, Australian dogs are treated to a live music performance. I'm serious. It's a dog's life. Well, it was on Saturday when the forecourt of the Sydney Opera House came alive with the sound of high-pitched music and howling dogs at the world's first concert performed for dogs. Now, how about that? No, I'm not even playing. It's a real story. The concert was the brainchild of acclaimed U.S. music artist Laurie Anderson and rock legend husband Lou Reed. Anderson wrote the 20-minute piece, Music for Dogs, describing it as an interspecies social gathering on a scale never seen before in Australia. It was really so fantastic. All the dogs were really grooving on the music. They really seemed to enjoy themselves, Anderson told Reuters. Big dogs, small dogs, dog dressed up for the occasion, and even a 15-year-old off-grid dog whose owner pushed him in a makeshift dog wheelchair attended the world's first ever outdoor performance staged for doggies. I wish I had known because I would have brought my dog. It would have been awesome. But anyway, I thought it would be a great opportunity for Kim because he's old and he can't walk very far. He does like music, classical music, says the Border Collie's owner, Kim Beasley. As the winter sun beamed down, the white sails of the opera house shaded the audience, some perched on steps overlooking the stage, and more enthusiastic dog owners closer to the stage to make the most of the performance. While dog owners could hear the music, some of the strange tones and high pitches were certainly geared for the dogs to appreciate rather than their two-legged owners. With so many sizes and breeds of dogs in one spot, a local Sydney vet was on site in case there was any brawling. But with only one minor injury to report, he was able to have a laugh about the incident. It's fantastic. It's a testament to Lori and her reputation and the organizers of the event. There's been no problem with the dogs. Everyone's been responsible. Someone stood on a dog's leg and it's a little bit sore, but that's about it. The performance was part of the Vivid Light Festival, where it runs in Sydney from May 27th to June 20th, 2010. They need to come to the States because that's just awesome. I would have totally brought my dog to a dog. And I don't even know what type of music my dog likes. I'd have to really ponder that. I'm going to ask him after the show. Maybe he'll tell me. But anyway, very briefly, after the good news, I wanted to give a shout-out tonight to the Noetic Sciences. They are studying the powers of consciousness. It's a really great group. You should definitely check them out. They've got a huge body of research and information for you all to share. So you should definitely look into that. Also want to remind everybody that Keys to Awakening Feminine Power, Catherine Woodward-Thomas and Claire Zamet's organization to kind of help women awaken into their power. We actually had her on the show, Catherine. She was phenomenal. Their teleclass is going to start soon, so you should definitely check them out. So that's all I've got for you. And now we need to jump right into tonight's guest, who I am so excited, so excited to have on. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Michael Cremo. He wrote the book Forbidden Archaeology, The Hidden History of the Human Race. It quickly became a best-selling underground classic, sold over 200,000 copies in more than 13 different languages. He has also written Human Devolution. And he also wrote another book where I'm very interested in talking to him about called Divine Nature. He is on the cutting edge of science and culture issues. He is a member of so many organizations, really profound ones, the History of Science Society, the World Archaeological Congress, the Philosophy of Science Association. He is a fascinating researcher, a really great spirit, and we are going to really dig in and ask him some interesting questions tonight. Michael, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hello. Welcome to Paranormal 101.
Great to be with you and all your listeners.
Yes, we've got a really active chat room tonight, so they are obviously excited to hear all about you. So, Michael, I really want to ask you, first of all, I was reading some of your biodata on your website. It's absolutely fascinating. So can you kind of share with the listeners tonight kind of what made you take this path that you're on?
Well, there were a lot of influences on me as I was growing up. I mean, for one thing, I was born in a military family. My father was a military officer. So there's some good things about that. There's some bad things about that. One of the good things for a kid is that you get to see a lot of different places because the family would move from place to place in the United States and around the world. Mm-hmm. And that opened me up to the idea there's different ways of looking at things. It's not, everybody doesn't look at the world in the same way. People in other places, in other cultures, they may look at the world in a different way. So that opened my mind up to some different possibilities in terms of the way I looked at the world. And another thing is my father's particular specialty was military intelligence. He was an intelligence officer. So that also opened me up to the idea that there's secret knowledge. There are things going on in the world. There's knowledge that many people aren't aware of that you're not going to find in the newspapers, the textbooks, and things of that sort. So that opened me up to the idea that, well, maybe I'm not learning everything about reality that I need to know from my teachers in high school and university, things like that.
Right.
So that kind of opened me up to the idea of knowledge about different sorts of topics that aren't really mainstream. And when I was growing up, I decided I was exposed to so many things, so I wanted to find my own path to truth, really. So I began investigating different philosophies, worldviews, cosmologies, cultures, and I became fascinated with the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. I found there many ideas that made a lot of sense to me, like reincarnation, for one thing.
Mm-hmm.
I
We did a whole show on that.
Yeah, a lot of talents that we have, I think, are talents that we've carried on in previous lives. And for example, my mother tells me when I was 2 years old, she would give me alphabet soup, and she said I wouldn't eat it. I would just spell out words in the bowl. And, I think that's a sign that I was meant to be a writer in this life, which I am. I have become. Writing is my profession. Mm-hmm. And I think it's something that I started in a previous life and am continuing in this life. So as I got deeper and deeper into the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, I learned many things that I had not heard anything about from my teachers in school and university. For example, the idea of extreme human antiquity. These ancient writings had accounts of a human presence on this planet going back tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of years.
Wow.
So that's what got me started doing the research that led to the book Forbidden Archaeology. I began thinking, well, if these ancient writings say human beings have existed for millions and millions of years on Earth, and I'm talking not just about the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, but practically all the great wisdom traditions of the world have the same idea, that humans have been here since the beginning, that they didn't evolve from apes, that we didn't just come into existence a couple of 100,000 years ago, having evolved from more primitive ancestors. Human beings, fully human beings, have always been present on Earth. So I thought, well, if that's true, then there should be some physical evidence to support it. So that got me looking into the whole topic of archaeology, and that's what led to the book Forbidden Archaeology, which is a book that documents the actual evidence that scientists have found showing that humans have in fact been present on Earth for tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of years, but it's not something you're going to read in the textbooks, because it's just, I called the book Forbidden Archaeology deliberately because I found that sort of information, although it's there in the scientific literature, doesn't get publicized, and it's definitely not part of the standard education system these days.
No, it's really not.
So then I also was influenced when my readers started asking me, well, okay, you've got all this evidence that contradicts the current theories of human origins. Where did you think human beings came from? And that led me to write the book Human Devolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory, in which I basically present the idea that we exist in a consciousness-based universe. We're originally conscious beings living on the level of pure consciousness, and it's only when we enter into the world of matter that we become involved with all these historical topics and human bodies and things like that. It's in other words, to put it briefly, we don't evolve up from matter as many scientists now believe. Rather, we devolve or come down from a level of pure consciousness, which means there's more than ordinary matter in the universe. There's a subtle mind element that has unusual paranormal powers like remote viewing and psychokinesis and things of that sort. And there's also a conscious self that can exist completely apart from the body, completely apart from the mind even. And these ideas have some foundation in the great wisdom traditions of the world. I certainly found them in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. And
slowly getting some scientific attention as well.
Yes, that's what I mean. The two sources, the traditional wisdom sources and modern scientific evidence. So those are some of the influences that got me started doing the kinds of things that I'm doing. And I really enjoy doing them.
I think you would have to, because I am sure that, challenging Darwinism is not something that is widely accepted, and I'm sure that you've run into I'm sure you probably have some very interesting stories.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can definitely tell you if there are any students out there and they're interested in kind of being a little bit rebellious. I think the most outrageous thing that you can say in a high school or a university is that you don't accept the Darwinian theory of evolution. If you really want to stand out, and be different, that's the thing to do. Then
Now let's really start at the beginning here. What is it? What is the Darwin theory of evolution? Just in case some of my listeners don't know.
Well, in terms of human origins, it goes something like this. They believe that about 2 billion years ago, there was no life on Earth. There were just chemicals floating around the ocean. Some of those chemicals combined together in some unexplained way to form the first living thing, a first single-celled creature. And then somehow or other, some of those single-celled creatures started clumping together. For whatever reason, nobody's ever explained exactly how or why this happened. But some of them combined together to form multicellular creatures, which started somehow or other reproducing in a sexual way. Some of them became plants and animals in the water, seaweeds and fish and jellyfish and shellfish and things like that. And then some of the plants, they believe, gradually moved out of the sea onto the land, and some of the animals moved out of the sea onto the land. This would have happened about 400 or 500 million years ago, and then some of those animals became. At first, they were amphibians, and then some of them became reptiles, and then some of them became supposedly mammals, small mammals, and some of them went into the trees and became monkeys and apes, and some of them kind of came out of the trees and became ape men. This would have happened around 6 million years ago, according to them. And then about 100,000 or 200,000 years ago, some of those ape men would have turned into human beings like us. And this is something you see, it's taught in every textbook. It's more or less forced on people because in the education systems, no alternatives can be presented. Only this one theory can be presented. So that's pretty much, the theory of human origins. That's
one big cosmic roll of the dice, kind of, and here we are.
Somehow or other.
Somehow, absolutely.
But there's a lot of evidence that contradicts that idea.
And that's what I want to go into, really. What is some of the evidence that contradicts Darwin's theory of evolution? Because, recently, especially with, proponents of intelligent design and things of that nature, there's been a lot of it coming out. So I almost feel that, there's definitely more people who are really starting to question, Darwinian evolution. So what are some of the arguments?
Well, I mean, you mentioned intelligent design. That's something I certainly accept. That if you actually start looking at the various life forms, if you look at them at a very deep level, on the biomolecular level, you see very, very complex machinery, more complex than any machine any humans have ever built. And these very complex bits of molecular machinery are things that cannot have just come about by chance interaction of molecules and random genetic mutations and things like that, as many scientists would like to have us believe. So that's one category of evidence. And also, another category of evidence is what I've dealt with in particular, which is the fossil evidence, especially for the human species, because according to the Darwinian theory of evolution as it's taught now, human beings like us first came into existence between 100,000 and 150,000 years ago. But there is a huge amount of evidence that humans like us have actually existed since the very beginning of the history of life on Earth. That human beings have existed not just for 100,000 years or 150,000 years, but for 1 million years, 5 million years, 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, 100 million, 500 million.
Wow.
Even, there's even evidence going as far back as 2 billion years. And this is found, most of this evidence is found in the professional scientific literature, but it doesn't make its way into the textbooks because of what I call a process of knowledge filtration that operates in the world of science. There are just, if you go through the whole professional scientific literature on archaeology from the time of Darwin all the way up to the present, there are hundreds of discoveries of human bones, human artifacts, human footprints going back tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years, but it gets filtered out. Now, another thing that contradicts the current Darwinian evolutionary understandings of human origins is all the evidence for paranormal powers, for the existence of a conscious self that can exist apart from the body, because the Darwinian theory of evolution, as it was formulated by Charles Darwin, and as it has been practiced by his modern followers, is pretty much strictly materialistic. They would say, all right, what about consciousness? Well, that's just a product of brain chemistry. If you've got molecules in the brain organized in a sufficiently complex way, that will somehow or other produce what we call mind or consciousness, but only temporarily and only in association with those chemicals. And when the chemicals are disorganized, as happens at death, then there's no more consciousness, no more mind, no more love, none of that. So under that particular worldview, under that particular way of looking at things, it is matter that is primary. And as far as consciousness goes, with all its powers, including the paranormal powers of remote viewing, out-of-body travel, psychokinesis, mind over matter, all that
astral
stuff,
projection,
all that is not a fact,
right,
according to this way of looking at things. So I think that's another huge body of evidence that contradicts the current theories of human origins. All the evidence for the paranormal powers of the mind, because see, that means once this is accepted, that there are that the mind and consciousness have paranormal powers, including the ability to manipulate and influence biological form, then that means there are other ways to explain the production of biological form other than the Darwinian theory of evolution. You could have intelligent design, you could have conscious, intentional production of biological forms. And there's a lot of evidence for this. There's a lot of evidence that mind and consciousness can affect biological form. There's all the evidence for remote
really
healing.
Yes.
Remote healing, for example. There are even examples of there's been scientific research done even on simple bacteria showing that healers, if they direct positive healing energy at bacteria in petri dishes that have been exposed to antibiotics, they can overcome the influence of the antibiotics. They can
I love those studies. They just make me so happy.
Beverly, like scientists like Beverly Rubik of the Frontier Sciences Institute that was operating at the University of Pennsylvania was doing some of that research, and so there are huge categories of evidence that contradict the Darwinian theory of evolution.
Michael, why do you think there is really just this stigma to just reject anything that goes against Darwin? I mean, because I certainly, as far as intelligent design goes, I understand the implications there are absolutely huge because science, religion have been in this war for centuries and blah, 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 blah. I mean, but even, just coming at it from a purely scientific, don't enter into the philosophical, what source is and that kind of thing, it's just really a foot down, absolutely not, we're not even going to discuss it. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think, first of all, it's human nature. For example, if I love somebody and then somebody tells me something bad about the person I love, I don't want to accept it. I may even become angry at the person who tells me such things. Mm-hmm. So today, scientists are very much in love with the Darwinian theory of evolution. It's like last year was the 150th anniversary of the publication of The Origin of Species, Darwin's famous book in which he presented his theories. It was also the 200th anniversary of Darwin's birth. So scientists all over the world were having these big celebrations. They were making all these television programs and special exhibits in museums and having special programs in school for Darwin's birthday, 200th anniversary birthday, and 150th anniversary of the publication of Origin of Species. They just love the guy. So I think that's part of it. It's just human nature. And one thing I like to say is I don't really object if somebody is a Darwinist or a follower of the Darwinian theory of evolution. I believe in it, academic freedom. I believe in intellectual freedom. I believe everybody should make up their own mind about what they want to think about these important topics, like the origin of the human species. But what I do object to is when they get a government-enforced monopoly in the education system and just refuse to allow anybody else to think in any different way.
Right.
So that's the problem I have. Not that somebody is a Darwinist. I have a problem when, yes, if that's
the only thing that we're being taught. Right.
And using they like to talk a lot about Galileo. Several centuries ago, there was this scientist, Galileo, an astronomer. He had some different ideas about the solar system. Mm-hmm. But at that time, the church had a lot of influence with government. So they used their influence with the government to suppress his ideas because it was different than the ideas that they had at that time. So the scientists like to talk about that. But now that these scientists, the supporters of the Darwinian theory of evolution, they're the ones that have influence with the government, and they're using their influence with the government to keep other ideas out of the education systems in this country and all other countries around the world. So that's part of it. I think it has something to do with power. There's different kinds of power in the world. There's political power, there's economic power, there's all kinds of power. There's also intellectual power, which is a very subtle one. And we see that if people have power, they don't like to give it up very easily, especially if they have monopoly power, especially if they have government-enforced monopoly power. They don't want to give up their positions of power very easily. So I think that's another factor that has something to do with it. And I think another reason is that the alternatives to Darwinism generally lead away from a strictly matter-based picture of reality. It starts leading into things that have to do with a lot of forbidden topics, like especially the paranormal.
Right.
Because you start getting into the idea, well, there's something more than matter to be considered. There's mind, there's consciousness, there are paranormal powers, and perhaps there are powers in the universe more powerful than we are. It sort of leads in a direction that they don't want to go,
right.
For various reasons. So I think there are a lot of reasons for
well, hopefully we can start to beat down some of these doors slowly but surely, and I think so, some of. Yeah, definitely. It's like you can't keep the lid on this forever. So let's talk about some of the evidence. Talk about some of the things that you talk about in Forbidden Archaeology. What have you found that has proven that man has been here, the current version of Homo sapiens sapien, we've been here for billions and billions of years?
Well, millions and millions of years. But one case that's always really fascinated me, it's the California gold mine discoveries. Like during the gold rush days, miners were coming to California. They were digging tunnels into the sides of mountains like Table Mountain near the town of Sonora in the Sierra Nevada mountains in central California. And inside these tunnels, deep in the solid rock, the miners were finding human skeletons and human artifacts, obsidian, spear points, stone tools and weapons, things of that sort. And what's really interesting about these discoveries, they were made in layers of solid rock that modern geologists tell us are about 50 million years old. That's before the time of the first apes and monkeys, even, according to the current Darwinian theories of evolution that are taught in the schools. So these discoveries were all collected and investigated by Dr. J.D. Whitney, who was the chief government geologist of California. He was a very famous scientist. Mount Whitney is named after him. And he reported this evidence to the scientific world in a book that was published by Harvard University in the year 1880. But we don't hear about these discoveries today because of the process of knowledge filtration that operates in the world of science. There was another scientist living at the same time, a Dr. William Holmes, who was an anthropologist working at the Smithsonian Institution. And he said in one of his reports, if Dr. Whitney had understood the theory of human evolution, then he would not have published that report. In other words,
wow.
In other words, if the evidence contradicted the Darwinian theory of evolution, that it couldn't possibly be true, it shouldn't have been published, it should simply have been forgotten.
Just like that.
And basically
Wow.
that's what happened. However, a couple of years ago, I was a consultant for a television special called The Mysterious Origins of Man that was shown on NBC. And recently, it's been released again in DVD form, Mysterious Origins of Man. But when the producer, Bill Cote, was making this documentary, he got in touch with me. He'd gotten a hold of my book, Forbidden Archaeology, and he wanted to include some of the cases in this documentary. So I said he should go to the Museum of Anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley, because I knew that some of the artifacts, some of the 50 million year old human artifacts from the California gold mines are still in the collection of that museum. But when he went there, the museum officials denied him permission to see or photograph or film these artifacts. But we were able, somehow or other, to find some photographs that Dr. Whitney had taken of these objects in the 19th century. So we did have some images to use in the television program. But then it was interesting what happened when Darwinist scientists found out that NBC was going to show this program to the American people, and it had evidence that contradicted the Darwinian theory of evolution. They tried to stop NBC from showing it. They weren't successful. So then they went to the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, which licenses and regulates the television radio broadcasting industry, and they tried to get the FCC to investigate NBC, force NBC to broadcast primetime apologies for having shown the program, and they also wanted the FCC to fine NBC millions of dollars for having shown the program. Now, I'm happy to say the FCC didn't go along with that, but it was sort of interesting that
it's a lot of effort to get that shut down.
These kinds of attempts were made. And then later, I went back to the museum myself because I had made a proposal to present a report about these California gold mine discoveries at a meeting of the World Archaeological Congress, which is one of the world's largest international organizations of archaeologists. They have a conference, a big conference every 4 years. So they accepted my proposal to give a report about these California gold mine discoveries. So I went to the museum officials, and perhaps because of that, because I'd gotten an approval from the World Archaeological Congress to present a paper on these discoveries at one of their big conferences, big science conferences, the museum officials decided to let me go and see these artifacts. And they're not kept in the museum itself. If you went there, you'd never see them. They're kept in a storage building several miles from the museum, and I had to go there accompanied by a museum official, go through all kinds of security and things like that. But I was actually able to see them, and it's sometimes people think these things are just things that happen in the Hollywood movies, like the Indiana Jones movies. Kind of at the end of the first Indiana Jones movie, they went into the storerooms, the Smithsonian Institution, and saw all this stuff there that's supposedly there and nobody sees. And sometimes people think that's just Hollywood, but it actually is a fact that there is stuff in the storerooms, the museums, that most people don't see, and some of it's pretty amazing.
Wow. So
that's one case, and if there were just one case like this, people could say, the supporters of the current theories could say, well, maybe there are a few weird things here and there, but the vast majority of evidence supports our point of view. But the point I make in Forbidden Archaeology, which is a 900-page book, that is, some people call it forbidding archaeology because they can't even pick it up and say, well, you can work out with it. You can press it.
That's quite a book.
So, but it's also available in a shorter edition called The Hidden History of the Human Race. But in any case, my point is that there's not just one or two cases like this. There are hundreds of them. There are hundreds of cases like this. So that's just one case. We could talk about hundreds of them. I could keep going for weeks and weeks. But that's just one example as a sample.
Wow. Okay, so you talked about the gold mine. Give us more.
Well,
some of the ones that really stand out in your mind, because it's crazy that there's 900 pages of this, and we're still kind of just trying to shove it under the rug.
Yeah. Sometimes people ask me, what's the oldest piece of evidence that I've found? And in the research that I did, it took 8 years to do all this research. It was, I didn't think it was going to take 8 years. I thought, well, let me just look. Maybe I'll find a few interesting things. I'll do 8 weeks of research. I'll write a little article about it, and I'll move on to something else. But as I got into the research, one case led to another until finally I had hundreds of them. And the 8 weeks of research turned to 8 months, and the 8 months turned into 8 years. That's how it worked. But sometimes people ask, well, what's the oldest case? And in the research that I did for the book, the oldest case that I found comes from South Africa. There, miners have found these round objects, spherical objects, that are about 1 or 2 inches in diameter, and the really interesting feature of these objects is the parallel grooves that go around the center of each object. Some of them have 3 of these grooves, some have 2, some have 1. And
the groove spheres.
Yeah, the groove spheres from South Africa, and they're made of a naturally occurring type of iron called hematite. Hematite's actually considered a semi-precious stone. You can buy jewelry made of hematite. It's so there are these round hematite spheres with these parallel grooves going around the center of each object, and these were also shown on that NBC television special, The Mysterious Origins of Man, which is now, it's still available in DVD form. But before NBC allowed them to be included in the program, they said you have to give them to an independent company of metallurgists for analysis and confirmation, verification. So this was done. Some samples of these spheres were given to an independent company of metallurgists here in the United States, and the metallurgists examined them, and they're the ones that told us they were made of hematite, but they also said they could not explain how the grooves on the objects could have been formed naturally in the layers of the earth, which means they had to have been made by someone with human-like intelligence. But the problem is these things are found solidly embedded in mineral deposits that modern geologists tell us they're over 2 billion years old. That's 2 billion with a B. So, and sometimes some skeptics have said, well, maybe somebody just took them out of the stone and then made the grooves on them. But I went to South Africa and I visited with the chief mining engineer from the mine from which these objects come. They come from a mine in a place called Ottosdal in the western Transvaal region of South Africa. And he showed me a solid block of stone from this mine that has these round objects solidly embedded in it, like raisins might be in a piece of raisin bread or something like that. And some of them were partially protruding from the surface of the rock, and they had the grooves on them that went back into the solid rock. So those are some very interesting objects.
Wow. So 2 billion years ago, possibly someone had to have made these things.
Yeah.
Wow. Is there any discussion about what they were for, what they might have done, anything like that? Or
people have speculated about that. My personal opinion is that they were some kind of game pieces, but other people have speculated that they might have been like weapons, in the sense because even we, a few centuries ago, our bullets, and cannon shells were round,
right?
And they had grooves on them. Not now, our bullets are, conically shaped, but in the beginning they used to be round. So some people have speculated these were possibly some kind of weapon. Some people have also written to me suggesting that maybe they were, they've asked me, are they radioactive? Maybe they were a way for storing radioactive waste or something like that. They didn't seem to be radioactive, so I'm not so sure about that. Now, one interesting fact that was reported in some of the initial reports, which happened to come out in one of the tabloid newspapers. Now, it's not that everything in the tabloid, it's not that I accepted these things on the basis of a report in a tabloid newspaper.
Right.
I checked it out. I got in touch with the museum in South Africa where these things are kept. I got in touch with the director of that museum. I got scientific reports about them. I got photographs of them. They were subjected to analysis by, a professional company of metallurgists. It's not that I just accept something just on the basis of what's in a tabloid newspaper. But on the other hand, I don't just automatically reject anything that's in a tabloid newspaper. I check it out. If it turns out to be something verifiable, then all right. Now, it's interesting that in some of these initial reports, it was also reported that in the museum in which these things were kept, they would sometimes just rotate automatically on their own in their display case.
Really?
So, yes. Yeah. In other words, there was a paranormal element to these things as well. Now, it's interesting. I published a picture of one of these objects in my book, Forbidden Archaeology, and a television producer in Holland saw the book, and he wrote and said, "I'd like to go down to South Africa with my television crew and film that object in the museum. So could you help arrange that?" So I put him in touch with Rolf Marx, who was the director of the Natural History Museum in Klerksdorp, South Africa, which had this specimen in it. But then Rolf Marx wrote back. He said, "This object has been stolen from the museum by a person he characterized as being what he called a white witch." So,
wow.
I hope it's being put to some good use.
Yeah, I do too.
But that's the kind of
amazing.
Sometimes these things disappear from museums. Yeah. That happened in this particular case. It was a pretty interesting story.
That is a pretty interesting story, definitely. Well, let me ask you, Michael, what is your favorite find?
Well, I've been talking about some of them, but for me, to tell you the truth, it isn't that there's just one favorite find or something like that. To me, the most astonishing thing, the most wonderful thing, was that there are hundreds of these things. That fact in itself, to me, is the most astonishing thing, or you can say my favorite thing about these discoveries, is that there are so many of them. But I think of all of them, some of the ones I've been talking about are among my favorites, like the California Goldmine discoveries, because they're just so well documented. But there's many others as well that I find very, very interesting. And some of these cases, it's also interesting not just the objects, what happens to the objects, but what happens to the scientists who discover them. For example, there's a case of there's an American geologist who I know personally. Her name is Virginia Steen McIntyre. Mm-hmm. And in the 1970s, when she was a young scientist, just beginning her professional career, she was a rising star in her profession. She was getting invitations to speak at big scientific conferences. She was getting grant money from the government agencies. She had discovered a brand new form of dating, not dating people, but dating.
Okay.
Dating,
right.
Dating, archaeological objects and things like that. So she had been a rising star in her profession, and then she was called down to an archaeological site in Mexico. There was a team of American archaeologists that were working in Mexico with some Mexican archaeologists, and they had discovered some human artifacts at a place called Huayatlaco in central Mexico, near the town of Puebla. And she went down there with her colleagues, and she used 4 different scientific methods, including the method that she herself had developed to date the site. And they got an age of 300,000 years in that area. So now that's astonishing for a few reasons. When the archaeologists heard that, they said, we can't accept that, because human beings capable of making the kinds of artifacts that were found at this site did not exist 300,000 years ago. They had not evolved yet anywhere in the world. And what to speak of being present in Mexico and North America, because the current theory is there were no human beings in North America until about 20,000 years ago. Supposedly they came over from Siberia to Alaska and started wandering down through Canada and America and Mexico all the way down into South America. So to have this kind of evidence at 300,000 years, evidence for a fully human presence in Mexico at 300,000 years ago, just contradicted not only the Darwinian theory of evolution in its currently accepted form, but it also contradicted every idea that they had about the peopling of the Americas. To have this, so they refused. The archaeologists refused to publish the age for the site given by their own hand-picked team of geologists. So Virginia Steen McIntyre was just really upset by that. So she and her colleagues decided to independently publish the age for the site. And when they did that, they experienced an extreme negative backlash from their colleagues in the scientific world. She, in particular, was labeled, a troublemaker, a publicity seeker, and although up to that time she had been a rising star in her profession, suddenly she hit a brick wall, and her career as a geologist was effectively finished because she had dared to publish something that contradicted the Darwinian theory of evolution, and she lost a teaching position that she held at a university in the United States. And as I said, because she had published something that contradicted the Darwinian theory of evolution, her career was effectively finished. So I think it's not just the objects that are discovered and the ages of the objects that is interesting to me. What's very interesting to me is what happens to some of these scientists who get involved in finding things that shouldn't be found.
Right. Well, you really have to have a strong backbone and be ready to go through some serious type of backlash just to even bring this stuff up. That's amazing.
Yeah, but one thing I'd like to point out is that the scientific world isn't monolithic. There is a very influential group that's very much opposed to anything like this. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want anybody else to hear about it. Sometimes they've tried to stop my lectures and things like that. So there is that element, but there's also a more open-minded element within the world of science. And they may be supporters of the Darwinian theory of evolution, but they're open-minded enough to be willing to listen to evidence that may contradict it. Those in the first group, they're never going to change their ideas. With them, it's like an ideology. It's you say something against Darwin, you're finished. They won't hear any evidence or any logic or any reason. All they have to hear is, if it's against the theory of evolution, it's wrong. That's their attitude. And but there's a more open-minded group of scientists who are actually, they may be supporters of the Darwinian theory of evolution, but they're open-minded enough to be willing to listen to alternatives, listen to evidence, and I think that's a very healthy thing. And because of that, there are scientists in this group who invite me to speak at universities, at scientific conferences, at things like that. They're willing to listen. They're not being monopolistic about it. They may be aware, well, this is certainly very controversial, this is certainly a minority view, but they're tolerant enough to be willing to hear it, and they're also open-minded enough to say, well, that also has a place in the world of science. Maybe it's not the minority view, but who knows? Maybe in the future, the minority view will be the majority view. But that's ultimately, I think, the way that science should work.
Absolutely.
But and then among that group, there's some who actually agree with me in a lot of this stuff, and this may include some of the scientists who have been victims of what I call the knowledge filtering process.
Right. Well, it's really great to hear that, despite, the opposition to it, there are still people willing to, to speak the truth and to put the evidence out there, just at least for discussion, because I think it should absolutely at least just be discussed, be considered, take, 10 minutes to think about it, look at the evidence, and then decide. Don't just accept something blindly.
Yeah, there are many who are willing to do that. What I object to is, I said, I respect the right of every scientist and every thinking human being to think what he or she wants about human origins, the origin of species, and things like that. What I don't think they have a right to do is to have a government-enforced monopoly in the education system and exclude all kinds of other alternative ways of looking at things. I think that's what I object to, not the fact that they may personally accept the theory of evolution. I think if it makes sense to them, fine. If that's what you really believe, fine. But you do not have the right to dictate what I should think.
Exactly.
And you don't have a right to a government-enforced monopoly in the education system.
Absolutely.
That's all.
You are absolutely 100% right, Michael. At least I think so. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to P101 with Michael Cremo. We are going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will be taking your questions. I see that I've got a caller in the queue, but you haven't put your hand up. So press 1 if you've got a question for Michael, and after this brief break, if you want to kind of join in the discussion. The call-in number is 347-215-7949. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possession. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one.
Welcome back, everybody, to Steve O'Ryan's Paranormal 101. I am your host, DCS, talking with Michael Cremo, author of Forbidden Archaeology, Human Devolution, and Divine Nature. We're having a really great discussion. If you have some questions for Michael, give us a call, 347-215-7949. Now, Michael, here's the question that I want to kind of lead into in this next hour here that we haven't touched on too much, is that if we didn't come from apes, sludge, whatever, where did we come from?
Well, that's a question a lot of people asked me after they read the book Forbidden Archaeology. Both scientists, ordinary people, they asked me that exact question. So I'm in a constant dialogue with my readers. So to answer that question for my readers and the people interested in my work, I wrote the book Human Devolution, which presents an alternative explanation of human origins. And in that book, I propose, before we even ask the question, where did human beings come from, we should first of all ask the question, what is a human being? We should know what it is we're trying to explain, in other words. So today, many scientists are going to say that a human being, or any other living thing, is simply a combination of the ordinary chemical elements. That's what we are. We're simply a combination of iron, calcium, phosphorus, all these chemicals organized in a very complex way. And as far as consciousness goes, it's just when you organize these chemicals in a sufficiently complex way in the brain, you get what we call mind and consciousness and love and all that. Mm-hmm. But only in association with matter, and only temporarily. When you disorganize the chemicals, no more mind, no more consciousness, no more love, none of that. So under that picture of reality, it's matter, which is primary. And what we call mind and consciousness are only temporary byproducts of extremely complex organizations of matter in the brain. So that's the standard textbook view. That's what you find being presented in all the education systems around the world. But I believe if we look carefully at all of the evidence that comes to us from various fields of scientific research, we're going to see that a human being is not just a combination of material elements. There's more to it than that. There is a subtle mind element that has some very unusual paranormal powers, like remote viewing, psychokinesis, the ability to travel astrally, things of that sort. And beyond that, there is a conscious self that can exist completely apart from matter, apart from the body, and there's a lot of scientific evidence for that. So a human being is not simply a combination of ordinary matter. It's a combination of matter, mind, and consciousness. And once we accept that, then one thing I should clarify is when I speak of mind and consciousness, I'm not speaking of temporary byproducts of bioelectrical activity in the brain. I'm talking about real things, real substances that have their own independent existence apart from the chemical elements. So if we've got all these three things, matter, mind, and consciousness, well, where do they all come from? How do they come together in the human form?
Right.
So what I'm proposing is we live in a multi-level cosmos. There's a level of the cosmos dominated by ordinary matter. That's where we find ourselves now. But beyond that, there's a level of the cosmos dominated by the subtle mental energies. It's inhabited by beings adapted to the conditions there, and people have different names for them. They call them astral beings, gods, goddesses, angels. So there's a level of the cosmos that's dominated by these more subtle beings that exist on the level of the mind energy. And finally, there's a level of pure consciousness, which is where I believe we're originally from. We originally exist as beings of pure consciousness, existing in harmony with all other conscious beings and with the source of all conscious beings. But if a conscious being becomes selfish, egotistical, it can no longer exist on that harmonious level of pure consciousness. Then it comes down to the lower levels of the cosmos, where it becomes covered by the lower energies of mind and matter. And that's what I mean by devolution, the process by which a pure conscious self descends into the realm of matter and becomes covered by mind and matter. That's what I mean by devolution. We don't evolve up from matter. We devolve or come down from a level of pure consciousness. And these coverings, these temporary coverings of matter, are what we call bodies. I prefer to think of them as something like vehicles. For example, as human beings, we're normally meant to live on the land. But if we want to go into an alien element like water and exist there, then we need a special vehicle that will allow us to function in the realm of water. We need a submarine or a diving suit, something like that. So I believe our bodies are like that. We're normally meant to live on the level of pure consciousness, but if we come into the world of matter, then we need vehicles that will allow us to function on this level. So there are higher intelligences in the cosmos that provide us with those vehicles, just like there are engineers and scientists who give people diving suits and submarines and things like that to live in the water. Similarly, there are higher intelligences in the cosmos who give the conscious selves who come to the level of matter vehicles in which they can function on that level. But the main purpose of those vehicles is to help us return to the level of pure consciousness. But some people can get distracted by their vehicles and the interactions of the vehicles on this level of reality, and they think that's all there is. But the real purpose of the human vehicle is to allow a person to gradually go back up through the layers of the cosmos, back to the original level of pure consciousness, where all conscious beings exist in harmony with each other. On this level of reality, the ruling principle is competition for control of material resources, and therefore we see so many catastrophes. We see the Gulf oil catastrophe. Why is that? Well, it's because there are companies competing with each other for the control of the material resource oil. They think that's very important, so they try to exploit and dominate and control it, and in doing so, they create these big catastrophes. Right. So, and this is the source not only of these environmental catastrophes, but the intense levels of conflict that we see in the world today. And the Darwinian theory of evolution is part of all this, because the Darwinian theory of evolution teaches us that we are machines made of matter. That's all that we are. And not only are we machines made of matter, we are machines made of matter in competition with each other for survival. Right. So you get this whole mentality, but there are two basic mentalities in this world. One mentality is to become more and more involved in the attempts to dominate and control and exploit matter in competition with others. And there's another mentality, which is I'm a being of pure consciousness. I'm not just some mechanical robot, that's meant to produce and consume material things. I am a being of pure consciousness who is meant to exist on the level of pure consciousness in harmony with all other conscious beings who are all coming from the same source. There's no need to be in conflict with each other. We should simply be living in the most simple, natural, and efficient way possible while we're on this level of reality, and trying to, instead of exploit the resources of matter, exploit the resources of consciousness. Right. For the benefit of all living things.
Now, let me ask you, Michael, why is it then, why come down? Why do this? If I'm existing, in consciousness, and I'm having a grand old time, and I'm in harmony, and I'm this, why in the world will I decide, you know what, I think I'm going to go to Earth?
Because we think we can. we can enjoy even more by becoming selfish. It's an illusion. It's an illusion, but we see that people often become attracted by illusions, and they have to go through some experiences in order to understand they've made the wrong choice by thinking that by becoming selfish, by becoming the exploiter of rather than cooperating with people, trying to control them and exploit them and dominate them and control them. This is the basic cause. The ruling principle on that level of pure consciousness is love, harmony, cooperation. It's when a conscious self develops another mentality, the mentality of selfishness, domination, control. And why? Because you think you can enjoy more. You think, well, this is great, but it could be better if I controlled everything, dominated everything. That's an illusion, but there's no place for it on that level of reality. So we're given a level of reality in which we can function like that, a virtual reality, you could say. So
plugged into the Matrix.
Plugged into the Matrix, or there's this film Avatar out there now about how
great movie.
You've got this guy, his consciousness is projected into a body that exists on a planet, and he functions through that body, although his real form is somewhere else, on some other level of reality. So we're all more or less in that avatar position, in the sense that our consciousness has now been projected down into these forms on this level of reality, and we're functioning on this level of reality. And as I said, there are two types of people in the world. There's one type is becoming more and more involved in the competition, the greed, the domination, the control, the exploitation of matter in competition with others. And the Darwinian theory of evolution supports that. It justifies that. It's meant to encourage that. And then there's other people in the world who are looking to understand, well, I'm not here just to produce and consume as many things as possible and destroy the planet, poison the air, poison the water, poison the land, doing it. I'm here as a being of pure consciousness to return to that level of pure consciousness. And how can one do that? There are actually different esoteric wisdom systems in the world that give different processes of contemplation, of meditation, of yoga, and things like that are meant to raise consciousness back to its original level of harmony and cooperation, existing on that level of pure consciousness and harmony with all other conscious beings and with the source of all conscious beings. So there are basically two types of people in the world. Some that are moving more and more in the direction of more and more environmental destruction, competition, greed, selfishness. What's the cause of the financial crisis that the world's undergone? Some people are too greedy. They want too much for themselves at the expense of others, and then those others have to suffer for it. What's the cause of the environmental crisis? The urge to dominate, control, and exploit the resources of matter to the maximum extent possible, rather than just trying to, which I believe we should do, is to produce our material necessities of life in the most simple, natural, and efficient way possible, while putting most of our human energy into developing the resource of consciousness. We're putting all of our human energy into maximizing our exploitation and competition and greed and things like that, and we're suffering for it.
We absolutely are, and that's really just silly. Now, let me ask you, Michael, why the forgetfulness? Because it seems to me that I've come from this, this existence where I'm in harmony, I'm in balance, and I understand my connection to everything. And then as soon as I come down into my body, I have completely forgotten from where I've come from. Why the amnesia?
Well, because if we didn't have that, we wouldn't be able to act out our selfish desires in this level of reality. Say like if you're playing a role in a play, say you're playing the role of Hamlet or King Lear or Ophelia in a Shakespearean play, the only way you can really do that is you kind of temporarily have to have some amnesia about who you really are in the real world. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to get into the role you're supposed to be playing in the play. Movie actors also have to do that. They have to some extent, suspend their normal day-to-day life in order to enter the role in which they can play. But I would say that still, although people have some amnesia, they also have a sense of what they're really meant to be. Otherwise, they wouldn't feel uncomfortable in different situations. Like, people may have forgotten what the original situation is, but they know there's something wrong with the situation in which they're in. Mm-hmm. Now, we can look at this Gulf oil crisis, and we can think, something's wrong here. Something is wrong. This is not right. Why would you feel like that? Why would you feel that something's wrong, not right? Unless deep within yourself you had the knowledge that things are meant to be another way. So I think the fact that we feel uncomfortable, or at least some of us feel uncomfortable in our present situation on this level of reality, points to the existence that points to some inner knowledge that we have that's been covered over, that is speaking to us, perhaps subconsciously, mm-hmm. that we're not in the right situation. We really belong in some other situation. And therefore, we try to change things. But the biggest change we may have to make is in our own consciousness.
Yes. All starts with us. Now, let me ask you, do you think that there might be a change going on? Because, as you know, there's been a lot of talk about, things leading up to 2012 and this, that, and the other. So the term that I like to use is conscious evolution. Do you think that maybe we're slowly shifting away from this, dog eats dog kind of world and kind of getting back to where we came from?
Yes, I do. And as I said, you can notice there are two kinds of people in the world. So it all depends on the individual decisions that people make. One type of person is the person who becomes more and more involved in the competition, the material production, consumption, exploitation, controlling. That's one type of person. The other type of person is the one that wants to see something different. See right. Some cooperation, environmental harmony, world peace, mm-hmm. things like that. And that, I think, that group is gradually increasing. Now, the problem is it's not the mainstream. The mainstream centers of power, economic power, political power, intellectual power, scientific power, they're all caught up in something else.
Right.
But
definitely won't hear about this on the nightly news.
But despite all that, there are networks of people forming who have these other ideas that, why are we fighting with each other? We're all beings of pure consciousness. We're all coming from the same source.
Absolutely.
Our purpose is not simply to exploit the resources of the earth to the maximum extent possible, meanwhile destroying the environment in the process. There's got to be a more simple, natural, and efficient way of getting our necessities of life.
Absolutely.
There are, and then there are people who realize, there's got to be more than matter. I'm not just a biochemical machine. I'm not just an evolved ape. I'm not, just some survival machine in competition with other biological machines. They feel that there's something more than that.
Absolutely.
So the numbers of people who are feeling that way and who are acting in that way is ever increasing. I'm seeing it all over the world. There's the alternative media that are developing. There's alternative politics that are developing. And, of course, sometimes there are politicians that exploit these feelings and pose themselves as somebody who's going to take things in that direction, and then they go in some opposite direction. But, you can
kind of sense those people out.
But there are people trying to establish self-sufficient communities who are trying to establish networks of trade and bartering and things of that sort, more natural living, who aren't going along with the genetically modified foods, and who are trying to establish networks for world peace and things like that. That's going on, and I think that the numbers of them are increasing, but there are people going in the other direction too. So I think the state of the world is going to depend on who's
tipping the scales.
Yeah, tipping the scales. I think we may be at a tipping point now where more people are desiring to go in the right direction.
Right. It's almost like we're at to the point where there's not many more choices. It seems that we've made quite a mess of things, so it really seems the only logical conclusion is to kind of evolve and get to a better, more in harmony, self-sustaining community type state.
Exactly.
Well, let me also ask you, in your book, is there any evidence for this? Because I was listening to you on Coast to Coast AM, and you brought up some very fascinating points about how there have been, all throughout history, these scientists who have won Nobel Prizes and all these fantastic studies by day, and then by night they were, delving into the powers of consciousness and the paranormal and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I've had some personal experience of that. Well, I'll give you an historical example and then something that I've personally experienced. Like, for example, in every physics textbook, students read about Pierre and Marie Curie.
Mm-hmm.
They were husband and wife. They were very prominent scientists. They both got Nobel Prizes for discovering radium. And Marie Curie, in particular, she's very famous because she was a very famous woman scientist who reached a very high level and got a Nobel Prize. And they lived early in the 20th century in France, in Paris. So that's in every physics textbook. Oh, they discovered radium. She got a Nobel Prize. He got a Nobel Prize. How wonderful. What you don't read in the physics textbooks is that they were, both of them, involved in paranormal research. They were doing research into psychokinesis. They did 2 years of experiments with a medium, an Italian medium, a lady named Eusapia Palladino. And they were doing experiments in which they saw large objects floating in the lab in the presence of this woman. So they concluded that these things are absolutely a fact. They have to be taken into account if we're going to have a complete picture of reality, these paranormal powers like psychokinesis, mind over matter. But you're not going to see that mentioned in the textbooks.
Oh, that's just sad, because that's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. It's people think science. Well, this paranormal. It's not scientific. It's mysticism. It's
right. Pseudoscience.
That's because they just don't know the real history of science. And just like there's a forbidden archaeology, there's also a forbidden physics. So I remember a few years ago I was giving a lecture about this at the Department of Nuclear Physics of the main science university in Budapest, Hungary, which is one of the European countries. And my audience was about 100 professors and graduate students of physics. So I started going through this hidden history of physics with them, and I was wondering, well, what are they going to say? So afterwards, one of the physicists came up to me privately, and he said, I'm very glad that you gave this talk. I want to tell you something. He said, by day, I do plasma physics. It's the physics of superheated gases and things like that. He said, but privately, I'm doing some experiments in telepathy, this physicist told me, I have my young son, I put him in another room, and I flip a coin, and then my son in the other room has to guess whether it's heads or tails, and he's getting 80% correct, which is just astonishing, because it's
wow.
just, if there's no paranormal influence there, then you should get 50% correct, heads or tails. You just guess, it's just
right.
a chance. You get 50%. But he was getting 80% correct. So he said, I wouldn't tell this to any of my colleagues, but I feel safe in speaking to you about it. And this is something I encounter all over the world, that there are many scientists who, if you just look at them, they would appear to be totally orthodox, just totally fixed in the mainstream ideas and not interested in these things at all. But
right.
privately, they do have an interest. And, of course, some of them are starting to organize themselves and their own groups, like this Institute for Noetic Sciences that you mentioned earlier on the show, established by Edgar Mitchell, one of our astronauts. It was formed in order to give scientists who are interested in these alternative topics some forum for doing that, for doing research that they can't do in their normal institutions. So, and this is happening not just here with the Institute for Noetic Sciences. There are other such organizations formed by scientists in various parts of the world to do things like that. So, yes, you're right about that. There are many scientists who, at least privately, are very interested in these topics.
That's phenomenal. That's absolutely phenomenal. Now, what is some of the evidence that you encountered besides that you put in your book?
Well, I looked at various categories of evidence. As I said, when we look at all the evidence, we find that a human being is not simply a combination of chemicals. There's also this mind element with its paranormal powers, and then there's a conscious self that can exist completely apart from the body. Mm-hmm. So some of the evidence that I documented in the book is the scientific evidence for the paranormal powers of the mind. And this includes things like remote viewing. And many people aren't aware, but the United States government, military, and intelligence agencies actually funded remote viewing programs in the 1970s and 80s. They've admitted that. Perhaps they're still doing it, but what they did in the 1970s and 80s has been documented, and the documents have been released. They actually found that they couldn't detect everything they wanted to detect about what was going on in Russia and China and places like that, just using their satellites and other kinds of spying equipment. So there was certain, for example, they might, through a satellite, see a huge building being built somewhere, and they want to know what's going on inside that building, and they can't get anybody in there. So they started using people with this remote viewing power to see what's going on, say, inside that building. There was one particular case that the satellites saw a big building being constructed in a Russian port city, and they wanted to know what was going on in it. So the remote viewers told them, well, they're building this huge missile submarine in this building. And the military people said, well, that can't be. How are they going to get it to the ocean? The ocean's a few miles away. This building's a few... And the remote viewers looked forward in time, and they said, and when they're ready to... when they've got the submarine constructed, they will build a canal from the building to the ocean, and they'll float the submarine, the missile submarine, out, the biggest missile submarine ever built, out that canal to the ocean.
Oh, wow.
Sure enough, that's what actually happened.
Oh, wow.
So one of the people involved in that program was a man named Stephen Schwartz, who used to work for the Stanford Research Institute, the SRI, and he was part of the remote viewing group that was employed by the United States government, military and intelligence agencies in the 1970s and 80s. And actually, I met him once. We were both speaking at a conference in Montreal, Canada, and we met, and he came to my lecture, I came to his, and after his lecture, he had a workshop. And he said this remote viewing ability is something that we all have, sort of like a musical ability. You know, some people may have it to a greater extent than others, but everybody actually has some degree of musical ability. And in this workshop, there were about 100 of us there, and he selected 3 people, and he said to these 3 people, I want you to leave. I want you to get in a car, get in a taxi, go anywhere you want in the city within a 15-minute driving radius. So in 15 minutes, you can drive quite far.
Right.
So he said, go anywhere, just drive 15 minutes. Go anywhere you want. And when you get to the place you want to go, try to send the mental imagery back here to the conference in the hotel, and we'll try to pick up on the mental imagery that you're sending. And he also gave them a video camera, and he said, videotape the place that you go to, and bring, take 15 minutes to go there, spend 15 minutes there, and then come back with a video camera. So while they were going out, wherever they were going, Stephen Schwartz gave us some instructions. He said, okay, I want you to clear your minds, and in 15 minutes, I want you to just write down what imagery is coming into your mind. Don't judge it, don't analyze it, just record it. And then do that for 15 minutes. And he kind of guided us through what to do. What do you see when you're looking up, looking down? We went through a whole process. And then later the people came back. So I said, okay, let me try this. So I cleared my mind. The first image that came to my mind was candles, like candle flames in red glass holders. And then I went through all the other imagery that I saw. And actually another researcher was sitting right beside me, Rupert Sheldrake, who's done some paranormal research himself. And there were about 100 of us in the room. We went through this exercise. And then after some time, the 3 people came back. And, they put their videotape into the machine, and the first image that came on the screen was candle flames in red glass holders. And I was just floored. I mean, I was just...
That's awesome.
I believe in this stuff, and I was shocked,
Right.
I kind of ran up to Stephen Schwartz with my notes saying red glass candle holders, and, so it's apparently... this remote viewing ability is something that we all have.
I think that really speaks to the interconnectedness of us all as well.
Yes. Yeah, there's a network of conscious beings. Sure.
Wow.
I think our technology, things like the internet and cell phones and all our modern means of communication, are attempts by our modern society to duplicate, in terms of technology, things that people were able to do naturally in previous ages, in terms of telepathy, remote viewing, and things like that.
Wow. Well, that's a phenomenal example.
So that's of course this personal experience I had occurred after I wrote the book. But in the book, I have the documented evidence for the remote viewing programs carried out by the United States military and intelligence services. And then I also have other examples of the paranormal mental powers. I give detailed information about the whole case of the Curies, which we mentioned. They were doing paranormal research.
Right.
I give so many examples of so many famous scientists who were involved in such things. And then the other category of evidence that I get into is evidence for the conscious self that can exist apart from the body. And some of the evidence for that comes from medical studies of out-of-body experiences There are times when a person should be completely unconscious, like after listening to me talk for such a long time. I hope everybody's still conscious out there. But there are times when a person, should be completely unconscious, like during a heart attack. The heart stops beating, blood stops flowing to the brain, and medical instruments show that the brain waves stop. A person in that condition should be completely unconscious, but many people in that condition report separating from their bodies, and they look down, they see what the doctors and nurses trying to revive them are doing. So some physicians have carefully studied this. They've tried to determine, are these people telling the truth who are reporting these things, or are they just making up stories? So
right.
Dr. Michael Cremo, for example, a cardiologist here in the United States, he did a study. He took about 25 of these people who had reported these experiences, and he carefully interviewed them. He said, tell me everything you can remember that you saw and heard the doctors saying and doing, doctors and nurses saying and doing while they were trying to revive you. Then he went and he compared their reports to the medical records kept by the physicians who had actually treated them, and he found the descriptions matched. So he concluded, no, these people aren't just making up stories. What they say they saw is exactly what the doctors say they did while they were trying to revive these people when they were totally unconscious. So you've got that. Then you've also got further evidence for a conscious self that can exist apart from the body comes from past life memories. In other words, it appears, say in these cases of out-of-body experiences, it appears that the conscious self temporarily leaves the body that goes back into the same body. But it also apparently happens that a conscious self may leave one body and then go into a different body. It's the idea of reincarnation. And there's some evidence for that in the form of psychiatric studies of past life memories. For example, the psychiatrist Ian Stevenson studied thousands of cases of past life memories reported by young children. And he preferred dealing with children because an older person can get on the web or go to a library and get all kinds of information and just manufacture some convincing past life story. But a child of 3 or 4 years old is not going to do that. So,
right.
So in hundreds of these cases, the researchers were able to verify the existence of the person the child claimed to have been in the past life.
Oh, wow.
And
that's amazing.
And sometimes there's other kinds of, not just information, but there's physical evidence on the body that tends to confirm the past life existence. For example, in some of the cases, the children claim to have suffered violent deaths, perhaps gunshot wounds, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these children had birthmarks in the exact positions of the gunshot wounds that the person in the previous life died by. And so there's all kinds of evidence for a conscious self that can separate from the body, that can go into another body, that can exist completely apart from the body. So those are some of the
great examples.
Various kinds of evidence that I deal with in my book, Human Devolution, to show that a human being is not simply a machine made of chemicals. There's this subtle mind element with its paranormal powers, and then there's the conscious self that can exist apart from the body. You could think about it in terms of a computer analogy. We could say the gross physical body made of the chemical elements is like the computer hardware. And then this subtle mind element is something like the computer software that allows the user to interact with the hardware. And then the conscious self is like the computer user who uses the software and the hardware and the web and the internet and all that. So a human being is made of matter, mind, and consciousness. And what we really are is the conscious self. The mind and body are like vehicles for that conscious self that we use to function on this level of reality. But we have an existence apart from that on the level of pure consciousness.
That is phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And we have a caller, so I'm going to go ahead and take them and see if they've got a great question for you. 402, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
This is Karen in Colorado.
Hello, Karen in Colorado. Do you have a question for Michael?
Hello. I have a big question for Michael, and it's all related. You know, everything's related that we're talking about. But hello, Michael. It's nice to speak to you.
Hi, Karen.
I've emailed you before and talked to Lori a few times.
Oh,
so
interesting.
It's nice to have. I wish I would have known this was on the air.
Yeah, Lori's my research assistant and publicist and webmaster. Yes.
She's awesome. I've enjoyed working with her. She's helped me immensely.
That's quite awesome. Please go ahead, Karen. Ask your question.
Okay. This is a very specific question because I'm dealing with a very interesting phenomena. I think here's what's going on. There are some activities in a particular place that I'm aware of that are very unusual. There's probably many things here that are probably right up your alley, yet to be discovered, but they are being guarded by, I'm not sure what kind of being or entity. I do know that for sure, though. The evidence is there of that. And so I'm just wondering what kind of experience you have had with this kind of thing, and I don't know if I've given you enough information to answer that.
I see, what all this leads to is that we're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. And some of these beings exist on more subtle levels of reality, and people have different names for them. They may call them ETs, they may call them ghosts, they may call them spirits, they may call them astral beings or gods or goddesses or jinn or angels, or, you know, they're all different kinds of names for them. And I believe all these things really do exist. You know, I believe, yes, there are human beings and plants and animals that are part of our normal experience, but then when we get into these more subtle levels of reality, the paranormal levels of reality, there are other beings there. And this is something that I became acquainted with at an early age. My family lived for some time in Hawaii, and when I was very young, when I was 8 years old, we went on a vacation to the big island of Hawaii. We went to the Kilauea crater, which is, according to the Hawaiian people, the home of the fire goddess, Pele. And our Hawaiian guides took us down into the volcano, across the floor of the volcano, to the very center of it, where there's what they call the fire hole that goes down into the center of the earth. And these Hawaiian guides, they had me offer some fruit, some bananas, into the fire hole for the goddess Pele. And they said, now, whenever you go into the realm of volcanoes, Pele will protect you. So I was thinking, oh, okay, you know, I was 8-year-old. It made an impression on me. So about 13 years later, I was in the United States Navy. I was in Iceland. I was at a weather station. They had put me at a weather station in Iceland. And, you know, just like recently, there was this eruption of a volcano in Iceland. So at that time, so in the early 1970s, there was another eruption of a big volcano in Iceland. It's called Hekla. So a buddy of mine and I, a Navy buddy of mine and I, we rented a Land Rover, and we drove out to that volcano to look at what was going on. We had to drive across glacial streams, black sand deserts. We came to the volcano. And at that time, it wasn't a violent eruption, but there was a huge river of lava flowing out from the volcano. So we went up and we looked at that, and then we were kind of sitting on a hill overlooking this river of lava that was flowing from the side of this volcano. and the hill started shaking. So we ran off of it. We ran back to the Land Rover. We turned around and we looked, and the hill upon which we'd been sitting exploded, and plumes of lava just started shooting into the air. And my friend, my buddy looked over at me. He said, "Boy, we were lucky. We could have been killed." And I said, "Well, maybe it wasn't luck." I was kind of remembering how those Hawaiian guides had told me this fire goddess Pele is going to protect you if you go into the realm of volcanoes. So, it kind of
that's not unlike what the guidance that I've had has told me to do in terms of, bless it for protection and permission to be in this area and to find the things that I think I'm supposed to find. But they're definitely being blocked at this point from exposure.
That's pretty fascinating. I actually had a gentleman on the show who was kind of talking about how sometimes when we visit these other realms, or kind of, if they're visiting us, that there is a certain etiquette that might be involved in some of these things that you have to do, certain ways to act. I find that very fascinating. It's an interesting story.
I certainly would want to know what that is, because
yes.
they're very powerful. And they're throwing electronic equipment off. They've kept people out of an area. There's this crusty kind of soil that's been there for 50 years where people should have wanted to go and been compelled to go just by the nature of the look of the place and the desire to play there.
Oh, wow.
And it's not been touched by humanity. So it's all really fascinating, but it's just...
Well, this is part of the traditional wisdom systems. If there are any Native American people around, maybe they have some insights on what's going on. There may be other people that may have some insights as to what's going on, but it's part of the whole traditional wisdom of humankind that we're not alone in the cosmos. There are, of course, there can be things that ordinary humans are doing, governments and militaries and things like that. That also can happen, but more and more people are coming to understand that we're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. We're not the only intelligent beings in the cosmos. There are all kinds of intelligent beings in the cosmos. And even Stephen Hawking recently, this famous astrophysicist, the one who's in the wheelchair, wrote the book about time. He's recently made a public statement that he believes in extraterrestrial life and things like that. So we just may have to start taking that into account, that we are not alone in this world. We're not alone in the cosmos. There are other conscious beings, and as our host was saying, that there may be certain etiquettes that have to be observed in our dealings, just like we have certain etiquettes among human beings about how to deal with each other. There may be certain etiquettes about how to deal with the other conscious entities that are present in the cosmos. Sure.
I think more research might be required, Karen.
Yeah, I'm definitely in that phase of, there's no books on this place.
Right. Yeah. No, I know it's tough.
And it's all been in intuitive guidance, and actually, you kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of the closest that I've come so far to figuring out what is expected that will kind of open the doors is to have it blessed by perhaps a traditional medicine person, and for protection and permission.
Sure. Well, Karen, thanks so much for your call, and good luck with that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right.
Absolutely. Great caller. Well, Michael, we're winding down to the end of the show, so I really want to give you an opportunity to share with our listeners where they can get your works, where they can learn more about you, kind of keep track of your activities. I know you're a busy man.
Okay. I have my website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com, and there's a travel diary there, and also a schedule of upcoming interviews, like this one was certainly there, and also there's an opportunity to get various books and other things that I have on that site. So that's probably the best portal to start with, mcremo.com, mcremo.com. And, of course, my books are pretty widely available at other sites and things like that. I've also got a Facebook page, mcremo Facebook page, and things like that. So, but I'd say the main portal would be my personal website, mcremo.com.
Excellent. And I hear, are you working on another book in addition to the Forbidden Archaeology?
Yes. Well, I've got a book coming out this fall in November. It's called The Forbidden Archaeologist, and what it is, it's made up of columns that I've written for Atlantis Rising magazine. I've been doing that for a few years, and some people have wanted copies of those columns, so I put about 50 of them together in this book. And they're really a good bite-sized introduction to a lot of the topics I've been talking about this evening. So that's coming out in November. And one thing I'm working on right now is, over the past few years, I've given many lectures at major international science conferences. I presented papers there. And I'm collecting all of those papers that I've given on different topics, both relating to the paranormal aspects and the forbidden archaeology work and sacred places and things like that. Mm-hmm. I'm taking all of these papers that I presented at mainstream scientific conferences, and I'm putting them together in a book, which will be out in the next year. And then I'm also working on a Forbidden Archaeology 2 book, because since the first book was published, many new cases have come to my attention. Many of them have been brought to my attention by listeners to shows like this. And so I'm putting together a book about the new discoveries that have come to my attention. But that's going to take a longer time, because I've got to research them and verify them. And it takes a lot of work. So, yeah, I'm always working on something.
Excellent. Yeah. I completely understand that. Well, you know what? I hope to have you back when your new book comes out. It's been a real pleasure talking to you tonight. You've been very informative. The chat room has been popping all night, so I know that nobody was sleeping. Well, some people might have been sleeping, but not everybody.
Okay. It's been really great being with you and all your listeners.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Michael.
Okay.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, that was Michael Cremo. Real pleasure to have him on. So excited. Great conversation that we just had with him. And that's it. That's all we've got for you tonight. Next Saturday, we've got Tina Irwin on. We're going to have a great discussion with her. She wrote a great book about healing through grief. She's had great experiences with the ARE. She's going to talk to us a little bit about that, a little bit about Edgar Cayce. It's going to be another great edition of Paranormal 101. Then at the end of the month, we've got our round table, and then after that, we've got a book release party. So you want to be here on Saturday nights. This is the spot. Thank you so much to all our listeners, to our callers, everybody for showing up tonight. I am your host, DCS, and I am out of here. See you guys next week.
I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. I'm going to show them a world without you. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible. Where we go from there is a choice I leave to you.